Hi, and welcome everybody to the Moses Kotane Institute. Our talk today is from the Maritime Unit. We are indeed a pleasure to have a very esteemed speaker with us today. Our speaker for today is Mpumelelo Mbuza. Mpumelelo, affectionately known as Mpumi, is currently CEO of a heritage organization based in Johannesburg and previously the marketing director for Ushaka Marine World. She has more than 25 years of corporate experience, spanning various industries, including tourism. Mpumi is passionate about working with others to make meaningful differences, achieving results, and making the world a better place for future generations. She is a member of the Institute of Directors of South Africa and has served on various boards as an independent non-executive director. Mpumi is currently board member at the African Association for Visitor Experiences and Attractions, amongst others. Her international travel includes participation in group study exchange programs in New South Wales, Australia. Mpumi holds a Bachelor of Commerce, a Master's in Business Administration, and is currently studying towards her PhD. In her spare time, she enjoys reading, traveling, swimming, hiking, and listening to music. Mpumi and her husband are blessed to have 3 children, and we are indeed blessed, Mpumi, to have you to share with us your experiences and the wealth of knowledge that you have gained over your years in the tourism industry. So without further ado, Mpumi, I hand over to you.
Sue, thank you so much for that kind introduction. It really is a pleasure to join the Moses Kotane Institute for this particular lecture or talk. I'd like to just specifically acknowledge Dr. Letitia Grimmett, who actually invited me to participate today. So I'm really looking forward to today. Greetings to everybody. Yeah, I would like to start with the first slide. I'm not sure whether it's on. I cannot see it yet. Can everybody see the slides?
Just give us a second. It should be flighting now.
Great. Lovely. I can see it on my side. Can everybody see it on the other side yet?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much, Julius. So I'm honored to be in a position today to give you my practical experiences and to some extent my views, some of the strategies that I've witnessed that we have been able to implement in the various organizations that I've been part of. It's lovely, by the way, to see Ushaka Marine World represented here today. Thank you. So as I've said in the title, this is a practical view of the tourism sector from my perspective, and this is presented to the Coastal Marine Tourism learners of Moses Kotane Institute. We may go to the next slide. The next slide basically covers the table of contents of this presentation. I have about 21 slides, and I hope that it will really allow us to engage. It will be meaningful enough for us to then have a discussion, if possible, later on. Let's see how time allows. So the presentation is going to cover the following items. Number one, I would like to just right up front talk about or introduce the African Association of Tourism Attractions, which I serve on the board of. I will also talk about the overview of the tourism industry. I think it's quite important to paint a picture and the facts and statistics in terms of where we are right now. Also the impact of COVID-19 so that we are relevant. And thereafter, I'll talk about the recovery plan of the sector from the South African Tourism Organization perspective. That will be firstly the overview, the interventions that have been planned and are rolling out right now, as well as the enablers that have been identified. Then I'll go to the section that I've titled Sustainable Tourism, and there I then talk about my own experiences within the sector. Firstly, I'll cover the overview. I'll go to talk about responsible tourism, as well as marine education and conservation. And lastly, ecotourism within that heading of sustainable tourism. I will then move to the blue economy. I'd like to share a couple of insights around that in terms of my practical experience. I will then move to the future. We'll talk about an overview of where I believe, together with all the stakeholders that I'm part of, the industry is moving to. So that's the overview. And I'll also talk about tourism markets by generations, which is quite an interesting, I think, aspect to the future that I'd like to share with yourselves. And then I will close with a conclusion. So without further ado, let us start with the next slide. So the African Association of Visitor Experiences and Attractions basically answers the question of how can tourism attractions within not just South Africa but Africa, have their own organization that is a voice that represents them, and also a place where attractions can come together, learn, connect, network, particularly to collaborate and also just, sharpen each other's soul. So why this association called Avia? Attractions are a unique and crucial part of the tourism economy. They drive domestic visitation and provide safe and memorable experiences for guests. Many attractions are not only entertainment and leisure spaces, but they also support education and conservation through play and adventure. Attractions add to the cultural, social, and mental well-being of society. Attractions provide jobs. They already have a substantial domestic market in South Africa. They drive tourism. And this association represents natural attractions such as mountains, beaches, waterfalls. They also represent man-made attractions such as entertainment, water parks, museums, aquarium, heritage sites. And also the sports attractions are part of Avia, as well as special events such as markets, festivals, exhibitions, and entertainment venues. So what does Avia do? Avia, number one, represents the interests of visitor experiences and attractions, as I've said before. It also raises awareness of the contribution that tourism attractions make to the broader tourism industry. Through education and training, also Avia is able to elevate the skills as well as knowledge of attractions managers within the industry. For example, Avia has an annual conference and also other events and meetings where this kind of education and training is able to be rolled out. Also, as a member of IAPA, which is the International Association of Attractions globally, Avia is able to run certain programs. For example, last year in January 2020, before the lockdown, Avia was able to run a course for the first time in South Africa, in Africa, for attractions managers. It was designed and rolled out by the International Association. Those people, some of them are, were from the organization I worked for at that time, which was Ushaka Marine World, were able to receive certificates, which was quite a unique thing. Avia also does data gathering as well as benchmarking. I talk always within the industry about the new benchmark study that has been developed, that was conducted by Avia this year. It's a first of its kind in South Africa. I believe it's going to assist attractions to benchmark themselves in the coming years in terms of how they fare compared to other attractions with regards to key statistics to do with those businesses and organizations. And so community building as well is an important element of Avia. As I've mentioned, in 2014, when the first annual conference was held of Avia, from that time up until this year, where the conference was actually virtual in August, the organization is able to build this community and be able to share insights and compare us with other BRICS countries as well as developed countries in terms of tourism attractions, especially regarding trends. I'm happy to have Vui here because she has attended one or two of those conferences. Avia is available on all the different social media platforms, as you have seen in the slide. The next slide talks about, is where I start talking about the overview of the tourism industry. If you can just go back 2 slides, I think. That one is moving forward. If you can just go backward. Thank you. So just to cover the overview of the tourism industry while we are going back to that slide, it's to emphasize the critical role that tourism plays within the broader South African economy. It's quite important to emphasize that, especially during this time when we are having lockdown and have been experiencing the impact of COVID-19 on the sector. Tourism has strong linkages to transportation, consumer retail, financial services, and other network industries, as can be seen in this chart. Okay, so if you take a look at the chart as a whole, which is shows the value chain of the tourism industry from customers to travel and distribution intermediaries, such as your travel agents, tour operators, event managers, and then the third one down the value chain will be transport and related. That includes your airlines, your rail transport, car hire, coaches, and cruise liners. And the fourth step within the value chain is the accommodation, represented by hotels, B&Bs, backpacker lodges, campsites, private rentals, etc. The second last stage within the value chain will be the entertainment and related, and that's where your tourism attractions, whether they are ecotourism or marine tourism kind of sites, will be included in that, but also conferencing, festivals, restaurants and other supporting services. And then lastly, the support and indirect element or part of the value chain, which includes government, financial services, network industries, retail, and wholesale trade. I thought it was quite important to look at the entire value chain so that we understand where we are as different institutions that are part of the tourism industry. Very important to note that the highest revenue generator, according to South African tourism statistics, the latest ones were done in 2019, is the transport and related services, specifically your aviation takes up quite a big section of that, as well as the car hire, chauffeur, and taxi. The lowest revenue generator in the value chain is accommodation, specifically your private rental, your smaller accommodation facilities. Okay, if we can move to the next slide, which still covers the overview of the tourism industry, but specifically the statistics, the latest that have been able to source from South African tourism. Number of tourists globally in 2018 were at 1.4 billion, and the forecast in terms of SA tourism for 2030 is 1.8 billion. Okay, the number of international tourists in South Africa were 10 million in 2018 and estimated at a forecast of 21 million in 2030. And the president of South Africa has, on numerous occasions, spoken about the focus of the tourism department on the fastest growing markets in the world, which is specifically India, China, and the African markets that are able to use the airlines to come to South Africa. In addition to direct jobs within the tourism sector, with export industry could generate 2 million more jobs on food and agriculture, construction, transport, retail, creative and cultural industries by 2030. That's according to our national president in 2019. Also in 2019, tourism contributed 10% to the national gross domestic product. And that 10% includes both direct and indirect contributions. As I've said, there's a core tourism industry, and then also the other industries that tourism supports that would not actually achieve what they are able to achieve without tourism. In 2018, tourism in South Africa supported over 725,000 jobs directly, and indirectly a massive 1.49 billion. Okay. In 2018, inbound tourism generated approximately 82.5 billion in direct foreign spend and 126.7 billion in total, which includes the indirect foreign spend. Tourism was the second most important export sector in the economy in 2018. And then lastly, South Africa has a positive tourism trade balance with the rest of the world, which means non-resident visitors spend more money in South Africa than South Africans traveling abroad. Okay. Now the impact of tourism, which is on my next slide. This is the kind of impact that has been experienced in South Africa specifically. Closure of businesses. We will all remember some of the businesses that closed part or even all of their units at the start of lockdown last year. If big companies such as Tsogosan closed, I think within 3 months of lockdown last year, plus minus 30 of its outlets in South Africa, I think that sent a massive message to all of us that we are definitely in a different place. It's not business as usual. But also those that were really impacted even more, I believe, the SMMEs, your smaller businesses. Some of them, you know, have not been able to recover up until today. Businesses obviously operating at drastically reduced capacity, massive job losses. In February 2021, government reported that more than 300,000 jobs were shed during hard lockdown. The collapse of supply and demand on domestic and international markets, the pressure on the South African tourism brand due to the country's association with the 501 variant of the COVID-19 virus. Most of us will be aware of how, you know, for example, in the UK, South Africa was in the red list of those countries that British visitors were not able to come to, and also that we, you know, countries like South Africa that were part of the list could not access that country. Thankfully, that situation has changed, as we've heard earlier this month, that we've been removed from the red list together with a few other countries, which is fantastic. And lastly, in terms of impact of COVID-19 on the sector, there's been a regression of transformation in the tourism sector, which is something that the whole industry has been pursuing over the past few years. The next slide covers the tourism recovery plan as outlined and developed by South African Tourism together with the National Department of Tourism. And this plan was developed in March this year, and it was published by South African Tourism. So the plan is aimed at not only returning the tourism sector and performance or its performance to levels it reached before the outbreak of COVID-19, but the idea is to place it on the long-term sustainable growth trajectory that fully realizes South Africa's vast and diverse tourism potential. Also, the plan assumes a rapid deployment of the vaccine and that South Africa will reach population immunity. Thirdly, the recovery plan also assumes that domestic travel will pick up in the short to medium term, serving as a leading indicator of South Africa's readiness to safely receive inbound visitors from other countries. This obviously amidst a weak state of the economy as well as low disposable income in households. It is estimated that international travel may only return in a large scale in 2023 or later. And interestingly, during the Avia benchmark study that was done among tourism attractions, most of them also answered in exactly the same way when they were asked, when do you believe the sector will come back to normal again? So 2023 or even later has been the answer. Lastly, on this slide, the recovery plan is expected to preserve 189 billion of value and help the sector recover to its 2019 output and employment levels by 2023, while positioning the sector for long-term sustainable growth. Implementation of the plan is estimated that it can reduce the impact of COVID-19 on employment by 125,000 jobs. Okay, so these are the interventions that have been identified by SA Tourism and that have been rolled out to date. Number one, to implement norms and standards for safe operations across the value chain to enable safe travel and build traveler confidence. And central to the ability to travel again is the need for operational measures to minimize transmission of risk across the tourism value chain. Okay, and the plan is to integrate these into various training programs targeting the unemployed as well as retrenched youth, while also training the SMMEs in rural areas, in particular in townships as well and small towns. Now, the norms and standards also include, in addition, the new protocols that have been developed by the Tourism Business Council of South Africa, TBCSA, for which Avia is part of as well. These protocols have been quite useful already to most of the tourism attractions. I know at Tushaga, when lockdown hit and there had to be adjustments in terms of how, which sections of the park were going to remain open and which were not, and the COVID protocols obviously guided us in terms of those kind of changes that had to be made. But also these protocols from the TBCSA were very useful because they were quite specific in terms of the different aspects that uniquely pertain to the tourism industry. Number two, the recovery plan also includes the intervention where domestic demand will be stimulated through targeted initiatives and campaigns. Domestic tourism obviously is a key driver of tourism and of tourism recovery, and stimulating the domestic tourism through deal-driven campaigns is expected to coincide with the peak periods within our local industry. We have seen how short-lived, for example, as a campaign of South African tourism has been resuscitated and is already on the rollout because it leads up to the coming peak season in December. Another intervention is to strengthen the supply side through resource mobilization and investment facilitation. And that includes establishing the support hub that South African Tourism and the National Department have put together in order to provide non-financial support to the tourism businesses. Also, it includes the Green Tourism Incentive Fund, which ensures that there is green recovery and growth within the tourism industry. And lastly, this also includes the Tourism Equity Fund, which is designed to strengthen the transformation of the sector. Support for the protection of core tourism infrastructure and assets is also part of the interventions, and that includes community-owned assets to support an inclusive tourism recovery, product diversification, as well as geographic spread. Another intervention is to execute a global marketing program to reignite international demand that is already underway. We have seen in social media many of our tourism stakeholders within the public sector working hard to draw or to keep the South Africa top of mind in terms of the visitors or potential visitors from other countries. Tourism regional integration by prioritizing the implementation of the SADC tourism program. The idea there is to focus on the domestic market, but also as the next step before the wider international tourism visitors are invited to South Africa, or that opportunity comes. We start closer to home with our SADC tourism program. Lastly, to review the tourism policy to provide enhanced support for sector growth and development. So those are the interventions that our government currently has implemented, or they are busy implementing at the moment. And coupled with that are the enablers, which are found on the next slide. Number one, that's to form targeted strategic partnerships between government and industry. Secondly, to partner with relevant departments to ensure improved travel facilitation through implementation of e-visas, which are obviously world-class, and that's really the way to go for our country. And I'm glad our national president has emphasized this, the importance of e-visas. Tourism safety to be elevated, airlift capacity, and quicker turnaround times in processing tour operator licenses. The president, in addition, also highlighted the importance of their focus on those key and fastest growing markets, as I've previously indicated: India, China, Africa air markets. The deployment of vaccine to frontline workers in particular, and the attainment of population immunity and participating in global efforts to facilitate safe travel is an enabler as well. And the last enabler is to stimulate domestic demand through government consumption expenditure. Okay, we've spoken about the kind of funds that have been established to facilitate this. So I'll now move to the next section, which is sustainable tourism. That diagram that you see there, some of you may have seen before, talks to what exactly does sustainable tourism comprise of, and that includes responsible tourism, ecotourism, environmentally friendly tourism, as well as minimum impact tourism. I will cover just my experiences in some of those sections in the next slides. Okay, so within responsible tourism, it's quite important for me to talk about overtourism. Firstly, the definition. What is overtourism? It happens when attractions are visited by an excessive number of people, causing congestion and overcrowding, and causing undesirable effects to the places visited, but also to the persons visiting as well. And so, you know, some of the causes of overtourism that has been identified, not just in South Africa, but throughout the world, is the growing middle class worldwide. And the effects of overtourism, and that's why it has been quite a topical issue within the tourism industry over the past couple of years, within conferences such as your WTM and others. Number one, the effect is that it creates negative environmental and social impacts. And then secondly, the increase of water consumption, at the same time, increase of air pollution, increase of litter, increase of waste. Almost all of us have witnessed or have seen pictures of, you know, people that are visiting at the beach, on the South Beach specifically of Durban, either Christmas or around New Year's Day. We've seen these over the past years. And that is a picture of overtourism. You know, at Tushaga Marine World, we were able to manage the numbers. You know, Tushaga Marine World capacity, I believe, is somewhere between, I think, 8,000 and 9,000 in terms of full capacity. And so when you get to those kind of levels, it's an indicator for the organization that it's already a little bit uncomfortable. And so there has to be strategies that are implemented in terms of addressing that. And some of those, for example, were working together with other partners, such as in the public or the public sector, through, for example, the Durban Chamber, which I was honored to play a role as chairperson of their tourism forum a few years ago, where eThekwini municipality and the Durban Chamber, together with all its members who are predominantly in the private sector, would then come together and make sure that the safety of visitors, both locally and internationally, during the festive season are really, addressed, looked into, and plans are made ahead of time to make sure that they have a good experience and there is no unmanaged over-tourism over those periods. Now, whether that we succeeded or not, that is something to be discussed. Now, at the Chamber, that's why we brought together every year the Tourism Forum together with the Safety and Justice Forum, because those two, had to speak, had to converse, and include other stakeholders to make sure that we are, that Durban is ready for visitors during the festive season, and are able to specifically address those issues that have always been known in the past were challenges around that time of year. Also, what we learned at Ushaka Marine World is how technology can be used to actually, encourage visitors to visit more during the lower seasons. At the same time, making sure that we manage and discourage visitors from coming through during the highest seasons. And, there's technology such as what our airlines will use, where price, the price is higher for peak seasons, and the price for coming to that particular attraction or for flying will be lower for the other seasons. So in that way, you are able to manage the crowds and are able to level out the number of people that actually are, come to your attraction. This is what is a global trend and is quite encouraged within the tourism attraction space. Okay, and then responsible visitors are able to exercise caution when deciding when to visit the most popular attractions. I think that's quite important to encourage, our people, to be smarter. And I think COVID-19 has assisted us with that, to actually prioritize, how you travel, so that you plan ahead and you decide where to go and when not to go for particular seasons during the year. Okay. On my next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit more about marine education and conservation in my experience. The picture you see there is a picture of our fallen legend, Gambit, who was a household name, who was part of Ushaka SeaWorld for I think 47 years. Him and I, were obviously born in the same year, because I realized that when he passed away last year, that I was at the same age as him. So just to cover, before I talk about Gambit a little bit more and what he represents or what he represented, just to cover some statistics around what Ushaka SeaWorld and a few other organizations were able to do. Over 100,000 learners were introduced to marine education outreach program of Ushaka SeaWorld in 2018. That outreach program obviously is a program where the team at Ushaka SeaWorld will actually be the ones that go to those parts of the province that were not able to come to Ushaka Marine World, for socio-economic reasons. And so that kind of program has been quite successful, and I believe it continues up until today. Over 10 million visitors visited Ushaka SeaWorld by 2019, and that's obviously over the years. And that was quite a milestone, because it talks about the exposure, especially for school children that access Ushaka SeaWorld, throughout the year, and that talks about the kind of exposure that our kids from school have been able to have in terms of marine education and conservation through Ushaga SeaWorld. SAMBRA, which is the organization behind Ushaga SeaWorld, reported that 49.5% of their respondents, that's obviously research, could give an example of something positive that they've done for the environment because of the Penguin Promises campaign. And that campaign is designed to change behavior so that our communities are able to be more responsible and care for our marine animals, but also for just our environment, our beaches, our rivers, etc. And so that is quite an important statistic because it tells the impact of those kind of interventions within our communities. In 2019, Ushaga Marine World and the Wildlife Environment Society of South Africa, WESA, explored a joint marine conservation experience package specifically for the Chinese market. And I smiled because I saw earlier that one of the ladies who was quite instrumental in this at Ushaga Marine World, Knox, is actually part of this event today. And so that enabled the two organizations to start saying, how do we position ourselves for the market or the tourism market being opened up? I think at that time there was some talk about a possibility of a direct flight from China to Durban specifically, and back. And so these kind of packages, are an example of how we could then meet those kind of demands. And in China specifically, they have an interest in marine conservation and education simply because of some of the challenges, obviously, that they've experienced within their country. Ushaga Marine World Swimanati Corporate Social Investment Program has been aimed at equipping rural learners with water safety skills and also introduce many of them to marine conservation. And this program was a response to a question that says, how do we deal with so many, apologies for that, I'm not sure what, okay, I thought I was kicked out already. So Swimanati enabled the Ushaga Marine World and other partners, there's quite a lot of them, to respond to the issue of drownings, the number of drownings in rivers in South Africa. Specifically KZN, I believe at that time, which was 3 or 4 years ago, had the highest number of drownings, specifically with school children that are trying to go to school and they have to cross rivers. And quite a lot of them, have lost their lives as a result of that. And so Swimanati program was designed to upskill those rural learners with water safety skills, at the same time introduce them to the oceans or blue economy. The picture that, just getting back to the picture of Gambit, Gambit, together with other dolphins at Ushaga Marine World, were quite instrumental, and they still are, those who are still there, in terms of providing creating an awareness or raising the awareness about marine conservation, about just care for the oceans, as well as the environment that we are in, the natural environment. And although there's a global case against animals in places like aquariums, the kind of marine education and conservation that SAMBRA does that the Oceanographic Research Institute, ORI, does internationally, and locally. It would not be possible without these kind of animals being, available within aquariums. And so it really, we ought to salute these kind of organizations, and I'm sure there's a lot of them, or a few others in South Africa that does this kind of work. And yeah, I think, Gambit was specifically the oldest living aquarium at Ushaga SeaWorld that was ever born in an aquarium, and has never really lived, in the sea, which was very interesting. To move to the next slide on ecotourism, I was also, blessed to serve on the audit and risk committee of Ezemvelo Wildlife, and this experience introduced me to the concept of ecotourism. I must say also, just personally, having grown up in KwaZulu-Natal and having a family that went to game reserves almost every year during the festive season, an appreciation for natural spaces, for ecotourism was instilled in me ever since I was small. So I think it's important to state that South Africa is among the most diverse countries in the world. That's according to the African Wildlife Foundation of 2018. And this diversity of attractions makes South Africa a preferred tourist destination. Now, Ezemvelo Wildlife on its own plays an important role in managing the KZN's nature conservation, including more than 120 protected areas, including the development and promotion of ecotourism facilities within these protected areas. And this covers from your Maloti Drakensberg Heritage Site to the Big Five that inhabits the game reserves like Kyuhluwe, Mfolozi Game Reserve, as well as the beautiful coral reefs that are found on the Isimangaliso Wetland Park World Heritage Site on the north of KZN. Ecotourism really minimizes the impact of tourism on the environment and promotes cultural and environmental awareness. And there's no doubt about that. It has an important role to play within the tourism industry in terms of transformation. And if implemented well, something even closer to my heart, it can create social and economic benefits for local communities. And I think that is the kind of direction we should be looking at going as an industry, just to break up the economy. And I think it would open a lot more opportunities. A few thoughts around the blue economy, which is the next slide. Some of the lessons that I've learned. Number one, the fact that the ratio of the rand value spent by the local visitor compared to the international visitor is estimated at 1:20. That is massive. And that talks about just how strong, the spend of one international visitor compared to a local visitor, the kind of buying power, simply because of the exchange rate, makes a huge difference. And so that was quite important for us at Ushaga Marine World to understand. And that's why there was a specific strategy to work with the cruise liners in terms of, providing them access into the kind of facilities that Ushaga Marine World has, while at the same time, they are able to enjoy, the local, what Durban has to offer. Okay, so during my stay at the Durban Chamber as the chair of the forum, of the tourism forum, We once, you know, one of the challenges that were you know, kept coming up in terms of the blue economy, especially around the harbor, all those businesses, whether they are small businesses or big business, was just the kind of restrictions around the visas that were an issue, because these, for example, impeded the staff members of your cruise liners, such as your MSC and others, from coming, you know, and experiencing Durban, simply because they could not get, you know, their visas. There was some red tape, and that was something that the chamber has been working on over the past couple of years, together with government, specifically Home Affairs, to lobby, you know, the reversal of these restrictions. I hope they have been successful. There is a need for inclusion and transformation within the oceans economy. And this to me is a big one. And some of the interventions or a strategy that the Durban Chamber, you know, developed was to roll out a mentorship program between established as well as emerging tourism brands or companies, which would then increase, or the idea was to increase the economic pie within the sector. And I think that is quite critical if we are to support, not just to support the smaller business, this SMME, but also to make sure that the experience of an international visitor or a visitor who's not from, you know, the local area, is able to experience a wider variety of activities or of, you know, attractions. And that creates, you know, I think interest if you have more diversity in terms of what they can enjoy. And so as a result, that could then, you know, expand the kind of options that you have within a particular part of the country. Film is an interesting aspect within tourism, because I believe it plays to some extent a role in terms of education and raising awareness about the blue economy. At Ushaga Marine World, I'm not sure whether it's still you know, in place. There was an MOU between the organization and the Durban International Film Festival, which specifically allowed oceans economy kind of films to be available and filmed, and showed at Ushaga Marine World around the time of the festival. And a big brand around, you know, surfing or blue economy kind of movies is Wavescape, which is based in Cape Town. And they had a really good relationship with Ushaga Marine World, and I'm sure they still do. Looking at the future, so towards the end of my presentation, I would like to just talk about some important trends that we need to note within this sector, specifically us as role players within the tourism and also the coastal marine tourism. Just to paint a, you know, to give an overview, there has been an increased demand in open and natural spaces due to national lockdown. I think we are all aware of that. And I think that accelerates what we already knew before COVID-19 hit our shores. You know, that kind of access to nature and access to what is authentic. Two, it's important to be aware of the cautious and the informed traveler. You know, those travelers are looking for unique experiences. They are looking for spaces that are healthy, not just physically, but also just emotionally, mentally, that are more on the healing side. Interestingly, at Ushaga Marine World, that was, I think, one of the top 2 or top 3 reasons why people said they wanted to come to Ushaga Marine World, according to the research that is done quite often at Ushaga Marine World, that they just wanted to be exposed to nature and to be in the quiet and serene place, which is interesting. And the younger kind of visitor wants something that's Instagrammable, that they can share with their friends, because it's unique, because it says, I've been there and I've done that. Yeah, and then the word spreads that way. Technology should be an enabler and not replace the core essence of the tourism attraction. I think it's quite important to note that. When myself and my ex-boss attended an IAPA conference in Dubai a few years ago, we were convinced when we returned that whether we are at an era of the virtual reality or the augmented reality, which is a big issue right now, or big trend in America, whatever reality it is, 20 years, 50 years down the line, it will be fashionable at that time. It's important that the content remains authentic, and that the message or experience about marine conservation and education or edutainment in the instance of Ushaga Marine World this time should always be at the core. And so that was exciting to actually be able to brainstorm after that experience and determine what kind of plan to have for the next coming years. Now, the last aspect I would like to talk about in terms of the future is just market preferences of the younger generations. I think it's important to share this in my next slides, because they are the future. They are the future visitors and obviously managers of attractions. And it's important that we get to understand what kind of people they are, because some of these trends we are seeing are actually aligned with our younger generations, our children, and the coming generations. So if you look, if I can just go quickly at this slide, if you look at the different generations in terms of the year of birth, so baby boomers are those that were born between 1940 and 1959. The Generation X's are those that were born between 1960 and 1979. So I'm one of the Generation X. Millennials were born between 1980 and 1994. Generation Z were born between 1995 and 2010. Now, I believe there's now Generation Alpha that comes after 2010. And so those are the little ones. Now, just to paint a picture, I won't read everything, but if you look at the context around each of those generations, so the baby boomers were those that were born around post-war, the Third World War. So dictatorship was a big issue, and repression in Brazil. Those who were born in my time, there was political transition around that time. Capitalism, meritocracy was dominating. Millennials, there was the context was globalization, economic stability, the emergence of internet. Generation Z is their context is mobility, the multiple realities, social networks, digital natives. That's who they are. And so their behavior, if you look at Generation Z, they are those, they appreciate undefined identities. They are communaholic. They are dialoguers. They are realistic. Millennials are more the globalists. They question and they are orientated to self. And I think we can see that through social media. Generation X apparently is materialistic, competitive, individualistic. Okay. If you look at consumption of each of those generations, and that's where I'm trying to get to. So your baby boomers, you know, they consume ideology, vinyl, movies, okay? Generation X, their consumption is predominantly on status, on brands, on cars. Millennials, their consumption is predominantly on experience, festivals, and travel flagships. And your Generation Z, their experience is on uniqueness, on unlimited, on ethical. I really like that about our children, especially the Generation Z, about bringing back the ethics. And I think these are the guys that are going to show us a thing or two post corruption, but that's another topic for another day. Now, in terms of the SA population, in 2019, of each of these, as you can see, the millennials take up, I think, the highest of the four, 19.2 million. You've got Generation X at 13.1 and Generation Z at 9.6 million. Okay, so I think for tourism attractions, it's important to understand what they prefer, and because it tells about the future compared to where we've been with the older generations. When they were asked by BDO South Africa, I got this statistic from BDO, a couple of days ago. They were asked, how often do you visit attractions? If you look at the different generations, a big 34% is Generation Z in terms of visiting attractions. And in terms of adventure activities, the biggest part of the pie is 31%. Once again, it's Generation Z. So these guys are the ones that are mostly in touch with these activities. And then the next slide is, when answering the question, why do you undertake recreation activities? So I've highlighted the two there under Generation Z, where they've said, first and foremost for me, it's to get away from my usual environment. Now, if you look at that answer for the other generations, you find it at number 2 for millennials, and you find it almost all the way down at number 5 for the Generation X and the baby boomers. So getting away from my usual environment is an important factor for our young generation, Generation Z. And then the other one, which is number 3, also is more elevated or more of a priority for Generation Z than the other generations, is being in nature. You see that answer at number 4 for millennials and at number 4 again for Generation X and Generation the baby boomers. So very interesting. These are the Generation Z, by the way, the ethical guys. They like nature and they want authenticity. And the next slide just talks about where do they prefer to be communicated with? What is their source of information? That's on the next slide. And if you look what I've highlighted there in terms of Generation Z, most of their information they get from social media, as well as secondly, as number 2, word of mouth. But definitely the highest being social media. And whereas your millennials, the highest answer was word of mouth, and Generation X, the highest answer by far was word of mouth as well. So you can see how technology and being online is important to the next generations, and I believe Generation Alpha as well. They are just they grew up in technology, and it's funny the kind of videos that you see around that compare how our young people have no clue of what the telephone used to look like in the 80s when we grew up. So yeah. Second last slide talks to what does this information implies for your ecotourism attraction, for your tourism attraction at large. Number 1, in terms of product, if you just go to the next slide, it's important to go beyond the core experience. and also digitize, modernize. Okay, I've spoken a little bit about that. In terms of price, it's important to make sure that you are affordable, and the opportunity of doing that is quite great when you partner with other attractions or other role players within the tourism industry, because packaging creates something different and something unique, or bundling also can be an innovator. In terms of place, without a doubt, if you're not online, then you are missing a whole growing market into the future. So there is just no question about being online or not. You have to be online as an attraction. And then lastly, in terms of promotion, it's important to market through different channels, but very critical to be online, your website, your social media, quite important. By the way, the 4 Ps are really 4 Ps of marketing: product, price, place, and promotion. Now, lastly, before I go to the conclusion, very important in this area and into the future to be aware of what I'm calling the papaya, but it's actually the POPIA Act, the Protection of Personal Information Act, which really governs how we use technology. Very critical to make sure that you've included within your systems as a tourism attraction, ecotourism, you know, the restrictions and the regulations around the POPIA Act, because it protects not just your organization, but also it protects individuals that interact with your organizations and all your stakeholders. In conclusion, what I'm saying is the tourism industry is a vital contributor to the South African economy. It will continue to do so. Sustainable tourism has and will continue to have an important role to play. And I think more so now than ever before, and will continue into the future, as you've seen for yourself, the more ethical kind of lifestyle that our children, you know, aspire to have, and just what is happening around the world, you know, China being such a big influence economically in the world, their interest in sustainability and sustainable tourism is really huge. And so this, without a doubt, is going to play an important role into the future. Technologies remains at the forefront of addressing consumer needs. Remember, we want to package using using technology, but the core of the experience and the activity and the authenticity of what that experience is needs to remain, because for us to remain authentic and provide authentic experiences and activities. Transformation and inclusion is a key that can unlock value for the industry. I really believe that. When we focus on your small business within the tourism sector, your African, Black, your women-owned, your youth-owned, and your differently abled people, very important, because then you are inclusive rather than excluding, you know, a lot of our communities. Demand for authentic, unique, exclusive, and rural experiences is on the rise. And then second last, the local collaboration for product innovation and an enhanced visitor experience is a real innovator and could change the game for any experience or attraction. Exploring leisure and economic opportunities within local communities is important for sustainable tourism in South Africa. That is my belief. Thank you so much for listening. That's the end. I'm not sure whether there's any questions or comments that anyone would like to make. Back to you, Sue. Sue, you are muted still.
Thank you so much for the presentation. It was very informative. It seems like Ushu is having a slight issue with her connection, and I currently don't see any messages. So would like to thank you so much as MKI for your time, and thank you. Have a lovely evening.
Thanks so much. You're most welcome. Bye.
Bye.